What's going on, workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And in an historic first, we're doing a response video to Chris's very own Gaming Kinda world first race video, in which many comments, lots of viewpoints were expressed. Chris, why don't you take us through some of, I guess, the more generalizations of some of the viewpoints that several people have had?
Yeah, so it was a rambling video following being in Frosty's World First coverage and OTK's World First coverage of WoW. So we had Savage and WoW right next to each other. 14 in a great expansion, finishing their raid tier in a phenomenal way, and WoW coming out with a strong expansion with its first showing of Shadowlands. And I tried to just sum up both games. I talked for 32 minutes. It's a long time, but like that's 15 minutes to sum up a game's end game and how it ties to all other content in a way that will make sense to people who don't play that game. And so I glossed over so much of 14 and so much of WoW. So first of all, thank you to all of you willing to kind of further those points. I couldn't get to all of them. There's no way. But there's a couple of viewpoints that kind of pop up. And I'd like to first start with, I guess, the more controversial, toxic ones, and then we can move into more like the strength of having two games if we get there. Trying to keep these videos a reasonable length. So the first thing is that there is a dichotomy between casuals and hardcores, and there are casuals out there who enjoy the world first and don't want to be a part of it, and they're glad they support it, and there's no controversy there, and it just ends there. But there are also casuals that don't want there to be hardcore content in games and appreciate that Final Fantasy makes less of it per expansion than WoW, and that's why they choose Final Fantasy. So like, I guess first let's just talk about that, Brian.
Yeah.
Like, how does that make you feel as somebody who doesn't clear Savage Ultimate? Like, do you want it in the game?
Absolutely. I've always maintained that it's I find it humorous in a way, like humorous not in the like laughing at somebody else's misfortune, humorous in the sense that it's they're like, I see this thing and I'm like, am I crazy humorous? Like, is this just me? But I've always seen casual and hardcore be a kind of a symbiotic relationship. They require each other. They require each other. And what I mean by this is, we'll start with the casuals. Casuals need a goal. You know, as somebody who was a hardcore player, is now I would say casual to mid-core, because I chose to multiply and and breed and have children, and looking towards the future of something that maybe that's something like we can do hardcore raid as a family as they get older, or that's something that I can do, you know, later when I no longer have to get up in the middle of the night and change diapers and things like that, and I have the energy and a little bit more time, he assumes, you know, for the future. And it's that what I look at when I look at people clearing Savage, going like, yeah, I'd like to do that. I'd like to be able to find a time where I can make that work. It just might not be right now, but what do I do in the meantime? I think casuals look towards the hardcore, who aren't the assholes, who are the ones that are like, you know, like, yeah, and seeing the cool gear and seeing the fights and seeing the clears. And that's something that motivates us to keep playing, even though we know we might not be there right now. I think the illusion is that you're one or the other. And I think it's just a kind of a spectrum. You might be hardcore during, you know, a season of like, I have a lot of free time, I'm playing really heavily. Or sometimes you're like, I've been really busy with work, I'll see you guys in a couple of months when this project wraps up. So I think people actually transition between the two, or like different layers, you know, more often than we kind of even talk about. And so I think that the hardcore have to have that kind of content, because why, you know, like, all right, if it's just a game that I just press A to win, all right, like that's not a game that doesn't.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's boring.
And then at the same time, there is no way a hardcore game can sustain itself without the casual player. There's, like, I would say, you would think the 99% and the 1%. The hardcore represents like a very, very small, very minute, very like piece of it. And a great example would be like WildStar. I loved WildStar, and they said, we're drawing the line in the sand. There's going to be no like cash, like, you know, we're not going to make this easy, or we're going to like, this is going to be the hardest thing. It's like back in WoW in the heyday, and the game doesn't exist anymore. And it doesn't exist because like,
Couldn't keep the lights on.
Yeah, couldn't keep the lights on. And like, and maybe there's other mistakes that like games make and things like that, but it's that the casuals fund the game. Like, they absolutely fund the game in volume, so that if they didn't exist, there wouldn't be a hardcore raid to raid. And, you know, so there's a symbiotic relationship, and it's always interesting when they get at odds. And here's where I think the drama comes from. It comes from the lack of care. I think the casual player is wrong when they won't do a bare minimum in party group content. Like if I'm going to heal in a group of people and I get matched with those people, I should be at least willing to understand my role within the party. If it's like you don't pay my sub, like that's where casuals fall, and I would definitely say like that's the wrong attitude. Like at least understand that.
Don't wear sandals to somebody's wedding. Like don't wear cargo shorts and a ratty t-shirt. Like just a basic level of respect.
Yeah, and the same thing being applied. Like just because I've run in situations where it's like the healer's like, I'm not here to heal. Like I won't need to as long as like y'all are like we're, you know, it's like, no, we're not running the hardest content. Like we don't need to treat everything as savage. And oh no, we cleared this dungeon in 12 minutes and not 10 minutes, or we cleared this dungeon, like we're still like performing, but then you're not getting chastised because you're not sitting here like, okay, like you're doing everything, you're just not, you know, like performing at the top tier, you know, purple rated, you know, player in that regards. Right, so right. I think that's where the friction comes in. It comes in a level of expectation driven because people say, hey, I'm willing to throw the dice and say, I'll accept everybody. And then all of a sudden the terms come back and you didn't get like the winning party. And then you're like, oh, no deal. Like, you know, I'll throw the dice as long as I keep winning in Vegas. But as soon as the dice fall the wrong way, I wasn't playing the whole time. No. Like, yeah. No. So yeah, that's the thing where it comes down. And then the differences of it, you know, kind of tie into that toxicity. The reason is, I would theorize, is because we're attracted to toxicity, like in the sense that like it draws our attention. Like if everything over here is working as it should, nobody cares, you know? No news. There's nothing to talk about. Like, hey,
game developer that makes great games, make great games on time. Like that's not news.
Yeah. And so that within that, like, I think the reason why, and then the fact that there's like with that drama, it spurs a whole cycle. You know, it creates all that like that. And so then obviously bringing in more eyes. So if there is a little drama, there is a little toxicity, it ends up bringing that to the forefront. You were saying, and I'm not even aware of the situation, that why wasn't Mythic covering like the world first?
Oh yeah, so there's a guild called Method that was kind of known. They were one of the top guilds in the world. Still competed in the race this time, just didn't place in the top 3 or 5 or whatever. Mm-hmm. They had some out of game drama around some members that were choosing to do stuff that you know, in some cases were literally illegal and for good reason. And then the community decided that the way Method handled it was not appropriate enough. And so as a result, the whole organization kind of had to go through a big restructure, lost a lot of players. Mm-hmm. And as a result, their infrastructure to do the world first coverage went away. Frosty, I think, had been covering it, and then Method came in and tried to cover it as a, you know, we only get one raid tier every raid tier, and what if we covered more than one game? So I think it was a logical move for them to try to cover 14. Mm-hmm. 14 obviously not real thrilled that, you know, basically big business WoW came in and said, hey, we're a well-funded community organization and we're going to come in and cover your event because you can't do it. 14, obviously there was some animosity there, and so then Frosty was able to put one together and get it sponsored for charity and all things like that. And I would love to see that move into it being, you know, I appreciate the charity component, I do, but for it to go to the next level, if it needs to be a for-profit event, then it would not bother me at all if he's able to put together the level of, you know, bringing in constant casters, being live for however many hours raiders are live, explaining things to people who come in and go, I don't play 14, but it seems like there's a lot of people in here. What's going on? You know, and having guests and having good microphones and good cameras and screen transitions with good graphics and all that stuff can cost money. Like the community can't be responsible for all of it. And so like if the charity component has to kind of fade, that doesn't bother me at all. But I think what was awesome is that it came from within the community. It came from somebody that already knows and loves 14. And I don't know why that makes a difference, but for some reason, intent in games, I think it's just that it's half art, half business. And I think that coming from the art side feels good. It feels like I'm supporting my local business. And so like, I love that Frosty did that, and Method kind of stepping down. That's what kind of allowed for that. You know, and he probably would have gotten a great turnout regardless, but like him being the one-stop shop, him being the big show, and him having guests and guest commentators. And it wasn't just Frosty the whole time updating a spreadsheet. It was a whole production. So if you guys didn't enjoy it, prepare for Ultimate because Frosty is crushing it. Hopefully he's not like, I was going to take that off. Like
you've just committed him to a whole, like, because Ultimate is a whole different thing than Savage.
I don't know if it exists.
Ultimate is a whole different thing than Savage because it's like you only get 2 like an expansion. So
it was awesome. It was awesome. And OTK was put out. It's an organization put together. Asmongold's obviously the recognized face in the room, but there's a lot involved there. And they did the same thing. They stepped up and they had, after every boss, there was a pinata, and you hit the pinata and it drops loot, and they give the loot to a random person. And during raid downtime, they're going over replays and they're opening up trading card game packs for World of Warcraft that have mounts in them and giving those away. And it was a whole thing. And like, I just love the spectacle of it because that's what I think World First offers. You don't have to be somebody who ever touches Mythic, Savage, Ultimate, whatever the word is in game to get value out of it. It's a community event. And keep in mind that these players, when they're not doing it, these are our experts. So when Brian says, hey, in my rotation, I feel like there's a choice here, I don't know which one to make, and he goes out to Google or to a Discord to find that answer, Savage and Mythic is what draws the kind of people that answer that question. It's what draws the people that have done the math.
Now, I talked a little bit obviously about the casual and the hardcore and gave my thoughts, and it sounded like you pretty much agreed. Is there anything I missed, or is there anything from, like, obviously the generalization of your video that that we haven't yet talked about in this regards, just from the what the viewpoints are coming from?
I think it's just the toxicity of it that confuses me. I think it's just the why be such a jerk to somebody, especially when it's coming from the top end. You know, if a kid walks into a room and calls an adult a dirty name, that kid may not have known better, right? That might be the first time they did that. They just heard it on TV. They thought it was funny and they said it. They didn't know it was a bad word. And it's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to be introduced to. No, that's not really how we do things here, right? Because kids start as blank slates. There's no empathy. There's no knowledge. There's no social convention. There's nothing. And they become ideally functioning, contributing members of society that know not to be a jerk to somebody in front of them in the line at the grocery store. Not because the thing you said about them was or was not true, but because we don't say that. Like, period. Because it doesn't it makes your day maybe 0.1% better, probably 0% better, and it makes their day a whole lot worse, and there's no need for it. It doesn't move society forward. And so we have behaviors that we all work by, even though we may have fundamental disagreements. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't bother me as much when it comes from the casual accusing the hardcore, because I just assume that it comes from a place of like, well, they're along their journey, and they may never choose to progress up their journey, but they might. And I can't separate out who is trying to progress and who is not. And so I'd rather just give them all the benefit of the doubt. When it goes the other way, though, there's not a single expert that was always an expert. There's not a single expert that was always perfect. There's not a single expert that was never brand new to the game. So the idea that especially when you get into low-level dungeons and a game like Final Fantasy XIV says one or more members of this party's never done it, you're going to get bonus loot. And then somebody has a little sprout next to them that's like this. And then when you log in, they're viewing a cutscene, which your client skips automatically because you've seen it before. And then they stand in something that's maybe the first time they've ever seen that mechanic. And you're like, I can't deal with this. And you just bail after. Why? Like, why? That's the one thing about it that, like, I can't say it enough.
Yeah, I just always kind of look into that situation and try to understand all different kind of aspects. And it's like, somebody said this, it's like, that isn't the first time. Like, there's something else going on. Like, there's something else that has led to that explosion, right? Julie comes in and says, like, hey, you know, it's like, if all of a sudden just I go, wow, that's unacceptable. It's like, there might have been something that led up to that prior, sure. Right?
That's probably a good way to look at it.
You know, and it's like, so what did? Like, so it's like, and there's probably not enough time because they just bailed to understand what led up to that interaction. Like, maybe they're just having the worst day ever. Maybe somebody ran over their dog or their cat, and they just wanted to get in, and they just wanted to get there clear. And I'm not excusing the behavior, you know.
No, that's a reasonable way to come at it.
You know, and it's like, and not that I'm always reasonable, and not always that I'm that way, because that's where, and there's been a few times in my relationship with my wife that I've lost my temper. Thankfully, I think that's like once or twice. Like, it's like, and we call one the great tamale incident. And so I'll share this story before we wrap up this video very briefly. There was at a point in time where I had a very small Mustang, and we somehow managed to like stuff it filled with like 600 pounds of tamales. And it was a nightmare situation, and it just went wrong. And the car smelled like tamales for months. Anyway, I can laugh about it now, but at the time I just was so mad. Anyhow, like it gets to a point where I just like have to look at her and say, I have to step away from this situation because I'm going to lose my temper. And if I do, I don't make logical sense. I make no rational sense. I'm just going to be mad. And so that's the situation. It's like I typically try to try to recognize that with myself when I'm getting to a position that like maybe I just
like 100 pounds of tamales.
Like 100 pounds of tamales.
We don't need to
on my lap, dripping the grease onto my pants. It hurt. But it's still no excuse. Like it's so like she still married me, you know, like having, and so it's like when it was a kind of a good test of our relationship that it's like when Brian's at his like worst, when he's just so mad that you still love him and you just kind of have to laugh at him because he just looks like a big dumb idiot. Like, okay, we're good. I can marry this guy. Anyway, I just really started to remember that. I haven't thought about the tamale incident for years. Anyhow, so that's just where I come from.
Maybe that's the answer.
Maybe that's
is to just assume they've just gotten their mirror taken off their car in the parking lot and nobody left a note.
Yeah.
Ethis Asher posted over on his channel as he goes through and makes sure that all his clips on Twitch aren't going to get him banned.
Yeah.
For having music in them and stuff. He went back and he posted like his worst, and one of them in there is back. I didn't even remember that he did this. He had an excuse wheel. So every time the raid would wipe, he would spin the excuse wheel of what the reason they wiped was. And like it was just all sorts of things. I don't know if you can do that now or if making fun of somebody would get you to that against terms of service. But maybe there is some laughter there. Maybe it's fine.
Guys, top link in the description of this will be Chris's video if you want to go check out his 30-minute discussion on it. If we missed any points, let us know. If you made it to the end of this video, guys, sound off with like tamales for you or some kind of phrase that includes the word tamale so we know that you made it all the way to the end of this video. Appreciate y'all being here. For Works Game, my name's Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in our next video. But until then,
take care.